So just wrapped up an arms and delts session, and today we're going to run through how you can start building muscle, the step-by-step process that you need to take. So I'll chuck up on the screen, this is my starting point, and this is my current position now. That's 3 years of following this step-by-step process, building food up, dieting down, building food up, dieting down, to the point that now we're about 60 kilos heavier than the starting point. So step one always has to be awareness. Everything starts with awareness. So originally, there's no need to track your food. So no need to track your food to specific targets, but there is a need to start tracking. Really easy way to do this, download MyFitnessPal. Free app, no need to buy the premium version, and just start tracking your daily food. So start tracking what you normally eat in a day. You don't need to change that, but you do need to be completely honest with yourself and just start tracking. Most likely, you'll find that you're under-eating protein and overeating on the calorie front. So depending on your starting position, if you've got quite a high level of body fat, it would definitely make sense to do a little bit of a diet before looking at really building muscle. But let's be honest, if you're new to the gym, you can 100% do both at the same time. You can drop body fat and build muscle. If you have a little bit more experience and you're relatively experienced with training, and training isn't as novel, then it's going to be harder to do both at the same time. So what I'd suggest in that case is definitely doing a diet, doing a small recomp, a mini diet, so an aggressive diet with the goal of dropping body fat, and then getting in a position where you're leaner, and then you have more room to then push up, which I'll cover that in another video. But let's assume that you're new to training, and this is the process that you need to take. So start tracking with MyFitnessPal. Just start tracking whatever you eat normally. This will give you an understanding of how much food you're already eating. And like I said, in most cases, under-eating protein, overeating calories. So from here, you can start putting some small little sort of changes to your diet in place. So we can start tracking your protein to 2 to 2.5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So grab your body weight in kilos, times that by, I'd edge towards the sort of higher side, so that 2.5 mark, and then we can look at reaching that protein target throughout the day. In addition to that, where your current sort of position is with carbs and fats, I'd look at just holding that at the minute. So if you've found that your weight's sort of pretty static, then we'd look at holding that for a small period of time, getting your training into a routine where you're progressively overloading in the gym, and getting you to a point where you're consistent with that protein intake as well. From there, dependent on the way that your weight moves, there can be small little adjustments to carbohydrate and fat. Don't really need to make adjustments to protein. That's just sort of a constant variable that stays constant training day, non-training day throughout. But dependent on if your weight's not moving, the goal would then be to adjust your carb or fat intake, to then mean that weight can then gradually start building up and gradually start increasing. From there, you then have that weekly adjustment period of time where you assess how that previous week went. You assess the positives, negatives, and then you make any tweaks from there. That second variable has to be training. So how can you make sure that your training is in the best position possible to allow you to be consistently adding muscle every single week? And this comes down to progressive overload. So you may well be training relatively hard at the minute and for a relatively long period of time, but I'd definitely start focusing on quality over quantity. So it's all well and good saying that you were in the gym for X amount of hours, you did X amount of workload, but what was the quality of that workload? I'd start stripping back volume a little bit and start building up your intensity. So intensity is a skill. It takes time to learn, to push yourself to what's called mechanical failure. Mechanical failure being the point where you can't do another rep whilst keeping your form perfect. That's the ideal sort of position to push yourself to. And what that means is you're taking that muscle to an all-out mechanical failure point where you can't do another rep whilst keeping your form perfect. That way you can then make a note, this is a must, make a logbook, make a note of the weights that you achieved, the reps that you achieved, and then each week you can look to progressively overload. It's important to note that you potentially won't be able to progressively overload every single week, but what is important to note is if you have that mindset that you can progressively overload, then that's going to be a lot better going to those sessions with that mindset. In addition to that, having that higher intensity approach, volume can be lower, so potentially more time effective. But you do have to make sure that that volume is really, really good quality and push towards mechanical failure, which again is a skill that takes time to learn. But it's one that you need to develop and you need to start pushing yourself towards. With that higher intensity, volume must be lower. So when we're looking at that weekly workload per muscle group, anywhere from 10 to 20 sets a muscle group makes sense. So those bigger muscle groups on that higher end towards 20, smaller muscle groups on that lower end towards 10. And it's something that over time, you can periodize a little bit more and sort of adjust volume accordingly. But at first, when you're newer to training, you don't necessarily have those weak groups. You don't necessarily have those weaker muscle groups. So it makes sense to bigger muscle groups, higher towards 20, smaller muscle groups, lower towards 10. Then over time, as you develop weaknesses and strengths, you can adjust that volume accordingly. Step number 3 definitely has to be recovery. So what are you doing in between sessions to recover so that you can make sure that you're progressively overloading as much as possible in those training sessions and performing as best you can? So sleep, looking at sleep, we want a minimum of sort of 7 to 8 hours a night, and ideally getting into those sort of deeper stages of sleep, so that REM sleep where you're truly sort of recovering and not that just sort of restless, light sleep. So there's a few ways you can go about doing that. So when we're looking at improving sleep quality, this is one of the sort of first points I do with my clients, is looking at getting you into a position where you're relaxed. So if you look at your autonomic nervous system, there's 2 branches of that, a sympathetic and a parasympathetic. That sympathetic is sort of a state of flight or fight response. So adrenaline's high, for example, I just finished my training session, so my sympathetic nervous system is elevated. And it would make sense to get into a position where I've got a parasympathetic dominance, so a relaxed state, and my heart rate's dropped back down before I eat my food. And that goes for the same before going to bed, getting into that parasympathetic state. In addition to that, blocking out blue light. So all these electronics emitting blue light, they affect your circadian rhythm. They're telling your body that it wants to be awake, not that it wants to go to sleep. So putting devices on night shift mode and blocking out that blue light. Grab a pair of blue light blockers off Amazon. They're not expensive and they will have a big impact on your sleep quality. Of course, we want some blue light throughout the day, in the morning, but sort of in that mid-afternoon point, it makes sense to block out blue light. So from sort of 4 p.m, I like to block out blue light. In addition to that, caffeine. I like to stop caffeine at sort of 2 p.m. Doesn't make sense to have it later. So if you're training later in the day and you want to sort of pre-workout, it would make sense to sort of have a non-stim-based one that's sort of focused on pump-based. So L-citrulline, beta-alanine sort of dominance. And then in addition to that, sort of something that sort of helps with focus. But you don't need a pre-workout for sure. And cutting out that caffeine will be amazing for improving sleep quality. In addition to that, staying on top of rehab and prehab work, so making sure that you're staying on top of your recovery. If you're getting injured, you're making sure you're addressing that early on and addressing why you're getting injured and adjusting your form and volume, etc. But if you're not getting injured, which is obviously happy days, you're just making sure that you're staying on top of that prehab work to make sure that you're performing at your best. So guys, the 3 steps there to adding muscle, dropping body fat, improving the way you look and perform. And if you'd like to eliminate the guesswork with that, you can jump on board an extra early bird offer, which I have running for my 8-week transformation program. 81% off for the next few days. That's the first link in the description. You can jump into that and I'll catch you inside the program. If not, guys, any questions, drop them below and I'll get back to you.